Sometimes the people we ignore are the very ones who made our lives possible. What happens when a town forgets the man who gave them everything? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe and share if this story resonates with you. Bill Stratton didn't look like a general anymore. There was no uniform, no starched collar or campaign ribbons on his chest. Just a flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans, a well-worn pair of boots, and a cane he rarely admitted needing. He moved slow but steady, each step grounded with the purpose of a man who had once directed thousands with nothing more than a nod. His eyes still held the kind of sharpness that made young lieutenants sit up straighter, even if they didn't know why. He walked the edge of the park in silence, passing by benches he had sat on decades ago. Trees he'd had planted still arched over the paved path, older now, like him. A bronze plaque near the entrance bore his name, but it had long been corroded with age and indifference. Few bothered to read it. Fewer still remembered who Major General William Stratton was, or why the town had this park at all. Bill didn't mind, not really. He didn't come here for recognition. He came for the memories. He came because the air here was different, more peaceful. Because this was where he could think without the weight of formality or the sting of loss. Because his late wife loved it, and because he had once made a promise to make sure this park never turned into another commercial lot. That was before the neighborhood changed, and before people like Chad Whitaker showed up. Chad's golf cart cruised along the sidewalk like a cop car on patrol. His sunglasses gleamed under the afternoon sun, reflecting a warped image of the trees and jogging path ahead. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting dramatically on the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt like it was a badge of authority. He loved Saturdays, especially since he'd gotten the HOA board to approve his neighborhood safety oversight patrol budget. It wasn't official law enforcement, but it gave him power, influence, and he wielded it like a sword. As he rounded the southern path, he spotted the old man walking near the war memorial, alone, unbothered, carrying himself like he owned the place. Chad's jaw tightened. There had been complaints. Unhoused individuals loitering, elderly men sleeping on benches. A couple even claimed a weird guy with a cane was spooking kids near the pond. To Chad, everything was a problem if it didn't fit his image of the community. He had curated this place, fought to install new playgrounds and manicured trails. He was trying to turn this into a premium living development. Appearances mattered. And the old man, whoever he was, just didn't fit the mold. He slowed the cart and pulled up alongside the walking path, just as the man came to a stop near a bench shaded by a towering maple. "Hey, sir," Chad called, plastering on a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Can I help you with something?" The man turned slowly. His gaze was calm, unbothered. "No, son, just walking," Bill replied, voice low but steady. Chad frowned. "I see. You live around here?" Bill nodded toward the houses in the distance. "Not far." "Okay. Well, we've had a few concerns lately. You mind telling me your name?" The general didn't answer immediately. He looked at Chad, then down at the walkie-talkie, the polo shirt with the HOA logo, the cart with the magnetic sign that read Neighborhood Operations Coordinator. Then he chuckled, barely audible. "Bill," he said finally. "Name's Bill." Chad raised an eyebrow. "No last name, no explanation, just Bill?" "Well, Bill," Chad said, emphasizing the name like he was speaking to a trespasser, "this is private parkland, owned and operated by the HOA. If you're not a resident or a guest, you're technically not permitted here without permission." Bill's jaw flexed. He turned back toward the pond without replying. Chad stepped out of the cart. "I'm just going to ask you kindly to move along, all right? Can't have people hanging around without a reason." Bill looked back at him, slower this time. His face gave away nothing, just that stillness soldiers get when they've already calculated the outcome. "I have a reason," he said. Chad tilted his head. "Oh yeah? I gave this town this park. That made Jed laugh. Yeah, sure. You and the Easter Bunny. Bill stared at him a moment longer, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded black and white photo. It showed a much younger man in full army dress uniform, standing beside a mayor, cutting a ribbon beneath the archway where the plaque now rusted. A small crowd surrounded them, children, veterans, reporters. In the center of the frame was a banner, Stratton Memorial Park, dedication 1989. Chad's face didn't change. He looked down at the photo, then up at Bill, then laughed again. You could have printed that at Kinko's this morning. Doesn't mean anything now. The HOA owns this land, so unless you got some magical deed in that jacket, I'm going to have to insist you leave. Bill didn't respond. He just slipped the photo back in his pocket and took a deep breath. I'll be here tomorrow, he said. Chad stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you're special or something? Bill didn't blink. He turned and walked away, slow but proud, cane tapping gently with every step. Chad stood, watching him go, hand already reaching for the walkie-talkie. This is Unit 1. Got a code blue at the pond. Elderly male, non-resident, refusing to vacate. Gonna need escalation protocol ready for tomorrow. As static crackled back, he added quietly to himself, We'll see how long you last, old man. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the war Bill Stratton was about to fight didn't require bullets or medals. Just memory, truth, and a town that had forgotten who bled to give them peace. Emily Carter was used to seeing older folks in the park, morning strollers, veterans in faded hats, moms with strollers and tangled earbuds. But there was something different about the man she saw that afternoon, the one slowly circling the pond with a cane and a deliberate pace that made time seem like it was moving around him, not with him. She'd seen him once before, months ago maybe, but hadn't paid much attention. This time, though, something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he paused at every corner of the path, like he was inspecting it, not judging it, like he was checking in on something precious. She adjusted her toddler on her hip and watched him from a bench near the duck feeders. Little Eli squirmed in her arms, desperate to throw more breadcrumbs to the circling mallards. She gave him a few more bits and set him down gently. The man, Bill, stopped near the bronze plaque at the entrance to the park. He crouched slightly to read it, brushing some leaves away from its base. She couldn't hear what he said, but his lips moved, and then he nodded to the plaque like it had answered him. Eli toddled toward the edge of the water, squealing with joy, and Emily stood up to follow, catching her son just before his tiny sneakers hit the muddy shoreline. "Careful there," she murmured, laughing. "You're not swimming with the ducks today." From the corner of her eye, she saw Bill approaching slowly. He gave a respectful nod and smiled gently at the boy. "Curious little guy," he said. "They always are," she replied, brushing a leaf out of Eli's hair. "You bring him here often?" "Pretty much every weekend. Gets us out of the house. He loves the water, and I love the quiet." Bill smiled again, that kind of warning smile that feels like it's seen everything and still chooses kindness. "It's a good place," he said, his eyes drifting back toward the trees. "It is," she agreed, watching him carefully. "You used to come here more, didn't you?" He turned his head toward her, not surprised by the question. "I did. You were the one by the bench last summer. The one near the war memorial?" "I was." She hesitated, unsure whether to ask the next question, but something in his calm presence made her feel safe, like he wouldn't mind. "You used to serve?" "Yes." "Army?" He nodded. 41 years, most of them overseas. Last few here. Emily's eyebrows lifted. 41 years? That's a lifetime. He gave a soft chuckle. It was several. She extended her hand. "I'm Emily. Bill." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Stratton?" He gave her a sideways glance, faintly amused. He read the plaque. I'm probably the only one under 40 who has. Then you're already ahead of most. She looked toward the corroded bronze. You donated the land? I did. But you still get told to leave, she said, shaking her head. I saw it yesterday. That guy in the golf cart? HOA guy. He talks to everyone like they're trespassing on a military base. Bill just looked out across the pond again. I don't mind him, he said. He's just uninformed. You were polite, she said. I wouldn't have been. You'd be surprised what you can survive when you stop needing people to remember you. That line stuck with her, heavier than she expected. Eli tossed his last piece of bread into the water and clapped. She scooped him up again and adjusted his weight on her hip. You know, she said, there's a mom group that meets here every Sunday morning. I could, mention your name. If people knew who you were, they wouldn't let that guy push you around. Bill looked at her, warm but firm. Names only matter when you're writing history books. I'm not interested in making one. I just want the place to stay whole. She didn't know how to respond to that, and she didn't get the chance. From behind them came the crunch of tires on gravel. The golf cart. Again. Chad pulled up like he was entering a battlefield. This time, he wasn't alone. A second cart rolled behind him, driven by a younger man in a white shirt, clipboard in hand. A woman in a branded vest with the HOA seal sat beside him, lips pressed in a line of professional disapproval. Bill turned slowly. Chad spoke first. Back again, I see. Bill didn't respond. Chad motioned to the woman beside the second cart. This is Jenna from enforcement and Mitchell from compliance. Since you didn't vacate yesterday and we've now had multiple sightings, I've brought backup. Emily stepped forward. He's not doing anything wrong. He's just walking. Chad ignored her. We've reviewed our occupancy policy. This park is HOA managed. If you're not a resident or authorized guest, you need to leave. I gave the town this land, Bill said, his voice calm but louder this time. It was mine. I donated it in 1989. Chad smirked. You've got no deed to prove it, and the city's transfer agreements place it under HOA jurisdiction. Look, he waved a document Mitchell handed him. As of 10 years ago, this land is our responsibility, which means our rules. Emily stepped in again, sharper now. Wait, hold on. If he donated it, shouldn't his rights... He didn't keep title, Mitchell interrupted. The city processed it as a full transfer. There's no clause granting ongoing access. Emily's mouth fell open. You're kidding. Nope, Chad said with satisfaction. That means he's got no more right to be here than anyone else. And if he's not an invited guest, I'm inviting him, Emily said. You're not on the board. You can't be serious, she muttered, shifting Eli on her hip again. Chad leaned in toward Bill, smile fading. You don't belong here, and I am not going to warn you again. Bill didn't move. His face remained still. But something behind his eyes flickered. Not anger. Something colder. Funny thing, Bill said, voice slow. People used to say that to me a lot when I showed up in countries I wasn't born in, places I had no business being. I always left them better than I found them. Chad scoffed. And what exactly did you do, old man? Stack sandbags? Emily saw it happen in the stillness between breaths. Bill didn't raise his voice, didn't square up or swing his cane. He just took a step forward. Not fast, but firm. You ever hear of Operation Gothic Serpent? Chad blinked. Of course not. Black Hawk Down, that ring a bell? Somalia, 93? Mitchell and Jenna shifted awkwardly. I was there, Bill said. I brought home 3 of my men who'd been written off, and I buried 2 who weren't. You want to write me a ticket, go ahead, but the ground under your feet, this very spot, was secured by people like them and people like me. Chad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Emily watched, stunned, as something shifted in the air. Not a speech, not a show, just truth, laid bare. And for once it was loud enough to silence everything else. Bill turned back to the pond, not expecting anything more. Chad stood frozen, and finally muttered, "We'll be watching." They drove off in silence, and Emily let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. Bill glanced at her. "You should get the little one home. Looks like rain." He smiled, tears stinging the corners of her eyes for no reason she could name. "I'll see you tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded. Tomorrow. And just like that, the man who didn't want to be remembered walked back toward the plaque no one read. Yet. Bill didn't sleep much that night. He hadn't for years, really. Not since the second tour in Afghanistan. The nights were always quieter than he liked. Too quiet. Silence had a way of calling up things you worked hard to forget. He sat in the small den of his one-story home, the walls lined with books and old photos, most of which had long since faded from sun and time. On the coffee table sat a framed picture of him and a young corporal, his son. Both in uniform, arms around each other, smiling like they had nothing but years ahead of them. That was before Fallujah, before the roadside explosion that left him limping and left the world emptier. He ran his fingers across the frame, then leaned back and stared at the ceiling, remembering the exact spot where he'd stood during the dedication ceremony 3 decades ago, right in front of the mayor, with a crowd of school children behind him waving tiny flags. The oak trees had just been planted. The benches were brand new. The plaque still shined. It had all been worth it. And now he was being told to leave it behind. He picked up his phone. Not a smartphone, just a solid old flip. Then placed it on the table. He didn't need to make any calls. Not yet. But he might tomorrow. Chad was already up before sunrise, pacing in his kitchen, scrolling through an HOA discussion board filled with angry posts. Why is there an old homeless guy loitering in the park again? Saw some veteran guy arguing with Chad yesterday, thought the park was for residents only. We pay dues. Why is this happening? He sipped his coffee and cracked his knuckles. The board meeting was tomorrow, but he was considering fast-tracking the policy amendment to ban unauthorized individuals with prior citations from returning to HOA-managed grounds. He'd already drafted it in his notes app. He glanced out the window. The sky was streaked orange now, and a few joggers were moving through the paths. He didn't see the old man yet. Good. Maybe the message had been received. He turned back toward the kitchen table, where his laptop was open to a local newsletter's site. He was halfway through submitting an article titled, "Restoring Order: Why HOA Rules Protect Our Community." He was going to include a line about vagrants pretending to be war heroes, then decided it was too much. For now, Emily stood in front of the community board's locked glass case outside the grocery store. On the left, the usual flyers for piano lessons and dog walking services. On the right, a perfectly spaced grid of HOA announcements. She stared at the newest edition. Remember, OM Park access limited to residents and approved guests. Below at the rulebook, small font, 10 pages, and she yanked her phone from her purse and took a picture, then messaged the photo to her friend Lydia. "This is about that old man I told you about, the one who gave the park to the city?" Lydia replied almost instantly. "Wait, the Stratton? From the plaque? I thought that was just a name." "Nope. Met him. Talked to him. He's real. And they're treating him like a trespasser." "That's insane. Thinking of writing to the paper?" "Do it." Emily hesitated. Then she opened the Notes app. Bill walked the path again at exactly 9:00 a.m. on the dot, cane tapping in perfect rhythm with his steps. He'd shaved, pressed his shirt, wore an old service cap, not flashy but clean. People turned to look this time, some with curiosity, some with concern, a few with something else. recognition, not of his face, but of the bearing, the quiet dignity. He didn't forget the way a man carried himself when he'd learned to walk through gunfire without flinching. He made it to the bench by the memorial and sat, reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was creased and aged, but still legible. It was the original deed, the one he'd kept, the one no one bothered to ask about, the paper that showed a condition, clearly marked that the land must always be accessible to veterans and the public. He'd never used it, never thought he'd need to, until now. Chad saw him from the trailhead, saw the service cap, saw the paper, and saw the group forming around him. Not a mob, just a half-dozen people. Walkers, a cyclist, a mother with a stroller, who had all stopped to listen. The old man wasn't speaking loudly, but he didn't need to. Chad stormed down the path. "You can't hold meetings here," he barked. "You're not a board member." Bill stood without looking at him. "This isn't a meeting. I saw you with that paper. You can't just go waving some old document around and—" "It's not just a document," a new voice interrupted. "Emily." She stepped up from the opposite path, holding her phone in one hand, voice clear and sharp. "It's the original deed, the city's original transfer agreement, and it clearly states the park's designation is conditional." Chad turned red. "Where'd you get that?" "From him," she said, pointing at Bill. "The man who gave you this land." Chad took a step forward, lowering his voice. "You're not on the board, Miss Carter." "But I'm a resident," she said, "and I've also contacted the local paper. You should expect a call from them today." Murmurs rippled through the small group. Chad looked around. Suddenly it wasn't just a jogger and a mom. There were more now. Half a dozen had turned into 15. A few people with cameras, phones recording. He turned back toward Bill. "You trying to start a scene?" Bill just looked at him. "I spent my life keeping peace. You think I'd throw that away now?" Another pause. Then a voice piped up from the edge of the circle. "Excuse me, sir. Are you General Stratton?" A teenage boy, backpack slung over one shoulder, stood next to an older man, his grandfather. Bill nodded. "I read about you in a history project," the boy said. "My teacher had us look up local heroes. You're kind of a big deal." That made Bill smile, genuinely. "Only thing I'm trying to be today is a man with a bench," he said. Someone wept. It broke the tension. Chad looked around again. Too many eyes now, too many phones. The moment was out of his hands. He opened his mouth to say something, but found nothing to say. He turned and stormed off without another word. Emily sat next to Bill once the crowd began to thin. "That was incredible," she whispered. He leaned back on the bench, tilting his cap back to let the breeze hit his forehead. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to sit where my wife used to read to our son." She looked at him, surprised. He hadn't mentioned family before. She used to bring him here every Sunday. We had a blanket, a little wooden basket with books inside. He used to run in circles until he got dizzy, then collapse in the grass. She'd pretend not to notice and just keep reading. There was a long silence. "Wars?" "I lost both of them," he said finally. "Different wars." Emily's hand found his. She squeezed it without speaking. It didn't need her to. The only sound for a while was the wind in the trees. Then Bill sat up a little straighter. "Tomorrow," he said. "I think I'll bring flowers." The next morning the city clerk's office was busier than usual. A couple applying for a marriage license, a man filing for a business permit, and an older woman frustrated that her streetlight hadn't been fixed in 3 months. In the middle of it all sat Officer Teresa Nolan, leaning against the front desk with a file under her arm and a calm, practiced patience in her stance. She wasn't in uniform, just a blue windbreaker with a faded badge patch on the shoulder, but everyone knew her. She'd done 2 tours in Iraq before joining the department. Didn't talk about it much, but people noticed the way her eyes scanned rooms, the way she parked facing exits, the way she always carried herself like she was never more than half a second away from reacting. She looked up as the front doors opened and Bill Stratton stepped inside. He didn't say a word. George walked straight toward her and held up a folded copy of the deed, the original carefully kept inside a plastic sleeve. She raised an eyebrow and took it gently. "Morning, General." He gave a quiet nod. "Something tells me you've already read this," he asked. "First thing I did when I heard," she replied, unfolding the paper with reverence. "I was a teenager when you donated the land. My dad took me to the dedication. I still remember the flags." Bill didn't smile. "Not yet. The clause is clear," she said. "Public access. Veteran access. Perpetuity." "I never wanted it used," he said. "Didn't think I'd need to." She looked up at him. "You know they'll fight it. HOA lawyers are already prepping. They've got money and political pull." Bill looked out the window toward City Hall across the street. "So do memories," he said, "if enough people remember." Across town, Chad sat in a conference room with 2 other HOA board members, pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in bullet points. A tray of untouched pastry sat at the end of the table. His coffee had gone cold. "We've got a problem," he said, pointing to a newsprint clipping. "The paper's running a profile on him. Stratton. They interviewed him and Emily Carter, and Officer Nolan of all people. We're losing the narrative." Ellen Pierce, the HOA secretary, squinted at the board. "Can't we just file a challenge, get a cease and desist?" Chad ran his hands down his face. "It's not that simple. The clause in the deed is enforceable. It predates the HOA's formation. We're stuck unless we find a loophole." "Well," said Martin, the treasurer, adjusting his tie nervously, "what if we lean into it? You know, community event, flag ceremony, maybe honor him publicly, then ease the rules back in later?" Chad stared at him. "You want to throw him a party so we can kick him out afterward?" Martin shrugged. "Optics. If we look like we respect him, maybe people won't question us later." Chad didn't respond. Not out loud, but the wheels were already turning. By the afternoon, laminated flyers began popping up on neighborhood bulletin boards, take to stop signs posted in shop windows. "Honor our heroes. Special Veterans Tribute this Saturday at Stratton Park." Odd views. Live music. Food trucks. Family fun. Special presentation honoring General William Stratton. Sponsored by the Oakbrook HO. Bill first saw one while walking past the local hardware store. He stopped, stared at it. Emily happened to be driving by and saw him from her car. She pulled over and got out, frowning at the poster. "You didn't know?" He shook his head. She folded her arms. "They're trying to get ahead of the story." "I know. You go." He looked at her, then back at the flyer. "They want to pretend they care," he said. "I'll give them a real reason to." When Saturday came, Stratton Park didn't look like itself. String lights were draped between trees. A stage had been built near the pond, with a sound system and microphones. Tents offered lemonade, soft pretzels, cotton candy. Children ran in every direction. Families set up lawn chairs. A local jazz band played a mellow version of America the Beautiful. Chad stood backstage, checking his tie in a handheld mirror. He practiced the speech twice before walking out. When he took the mic, polite applause met him, just enough to be heard, not enough to be enthusiastic. "Good afternoon, friends and neighbors," he began. "Today we gather not only to celebrate this beautiful park, but to honor a man whose name graces its very soil, Major General William Stratton." Scattered claps, camera phones raised. "And now," Chad continued, "we'd like to welcome General Stratton to the stage." A murmur passed through the crowd. Chad stepped aside, but Bill didn't take the stage from the wings. He came through the crowd, wearing his uniform, dressed and pristine. The medals on his chest shined like polished brass. His cane tapped rhythmically as he walked through rows of folding chairs. Children stopped playing. Adults stood up instinctively. Conversations fell to a hush. He climbed the stairs slowly, not with struggle, with command, and when he stood at the mic, he didn't hold a speech. He just looked out at the faces before him. 34 years ago, he began, I stood here with a promise that this land would remain open to the people, for the families, the children, the quiet mornings and Sunday picnics. I didn't ask for applause then. I'm not asking for it now. He paused. Let silence carry the weight. I don't need to be honored. I don't want a statue or a banner or a tribute. All I ever wanted was to keep something pure, something peaceful, intact, for everyone, because not everything that matters needs to make a profit. There were no sounds now. It's just breath, wind in the trees, and a deeper stillness. Some have asked me lately if I'm trying to make a point, stir trouble, fight for a right to sit on a bench. He looked toward Chad. But I'm not here for me. I'm here for the kid chasing ducks, for the widow with a book, for the man who doesn't remember how to be part of a crowd. He turned slightly toward the flag flying behind the stage. I've buried more brothers than I've counted birthdays, and every time I walk through this park I see one more reason to keep going, one more reason to stand. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out the original deed, held it up high. This paper says this land belongs to the people, and I trust that's exactly who will protect it. With that he stepped back from the microphone and sat down. The applause didn't come in a burst. It came, like thunder rolling over hills, slow, then rising, until it filled every corner of the park. People stood, on film, and for one long, glorious moment, Bill Stratton, quiet, tired, steadfast, stood taller than any building in town. That night, Chad sat in his office, watching the replay on the local news site. He stared at Bill on the screen, stone-faced. Then he closed the laptop. He wouldn't fight this, but now. But the look in his eyes said it wasn't over. Not yet. Mill didn't stick around after the tribute ended. He walked off the stage and out of the park through the back path, bypassing the small sea of well-wishers gathering near the lemonade stand. Emily caught sight of him, heading toward the neighborhood's edge, but she didn't chase after him. She knew that look. It wasn't fatigue, it was distance. The kind of quiet that settles on someone when they've said everything they needed to say, without expecting anything in return. The mayor had been in the front row, Linda Paxton. She hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, not since her city council days. But during his speech, she never looked away. Now she was sitting alone on a bench near the playground, sunglasses in hand, a file folder in her lap, unopened. I didn't know he still had the uniform, she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. Supposing he never threw it out, Emily said, approaching gently. Just kept it in a closet. For 30 years. Linda nodded. She tapped the folder against her knee, then opened it. Inside were copies of documents she'd pulled from the archives. The original land donation, city meeting notes from 1988, a letter from Bill's wife, handwritten in soft blue ink, thanking the city for considering his offer. Do you know why he did it? Lyndon asked. Emily sat beside her. I think he wanted to give something that wouldn't break. He lost so much. Maybe this was a way to make sure one piece of life stayed put. Linda closed the folder slowly. The HOA board's meeting again next week, emergency vote. They want to revise the park bylaws, still pushing for more control. Even after that speech, they'll dress it up as a reaffirmation of community standards. Use the public tribute as proof of shared values. Emily scoffed. They're betting people won't pay attention, Linda said. They're usually right. Emily looked at her, fire already kindling in her voice. They won't be this time. Bill sat on the porch of his house, a small single-story tucked between rows of gentrified renovations. The wooden steps creaked beneath him, and the flag on his front post fluttered lazily in the wind. His uniform was folded neatly inside, resting on his armchair. The phone on the table beside him buzzed again. Third time in an hour. Messages. Texts. Articles. He didn't answer. Not out of stubbornness, just instinct. The spotlight was never his home. It never had been. He'd said his piece. The town would decide the rest. But deep down, a thought itched at the back of his mind. He'd faced tanks with less arrogance than Chad Whitaker, and arrogance rarely went quietly. Monday evening came with the scent of fresh-cut grass and the low hum of summer cicadas. The HOA meeting was called to order in the community center at the edge of the neighborhood. It was the same place they hosted pancake breakfasts and Christmas raffles. The folding chairs still had tape on them from the last kids' science fair. This time, every seat was filled. Even standing room was taken. And Bill was there, sitting in the back. No uniform, no cane, just a steady gaze fixed on the front table, where Chad, Martin, and Helen sat, under a banner that read, "Together for Oakbrook." Chad cleared his throat and tapped the mic. "Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Before we move to the open floor, I'd like to present a proposed resolution for community park security and use optimization." He clicked a remote. A PowerPoint slide appeared on the projector. Resolution 7B, Strategic Access Guidelines. Martin leaned in. "We believe this will help streamline guest access and ensure safety compliance." Someone in the crowd muttered, "What does that even mean?" Chad pressed on. "We're proposing mandatory registration for all non-residents who wish to enter Stratton Park. Anyone not on the list will be considered in violation and subject to citation or removal." Murmurs spread. Chad raised a hand. "Let's not confuse this with exclusion. It's about order, fairness, ensuring our dues are respected." Bill stood. He didn't speak yet, just stood. The murmurs stopped. Emily stepped beside him. Not planned, just natural. She looked straight at Chad. "Let me ask something. Who's this really for?" Chad blinked. "I'm sorry. You say it's about order, but we all know what this is. You didn't like seeing someone you couldn't control. Someone older than your policy manual. Someone you can't box in with a registration list." "That's not true," Chad snapped. "This isn't personal." "It is to me," Emily said, lifting her voice. "It's personal to the families who use that park, to the veterans who stop by just to feel the sun, to the people who don't wear HOA polos but still belong here." The crowd stirred again. Linda Paxton entered from the side door, quietly. She moved to the edge of the room and stood, arms folded, listening. Bill stepped forward. One step. That was all he needed. "When I gave the land," he said slowly, "I gave it without conditions, except one, that it remain open. Not convenient, not profitable, just open." He reached into his coat and pulled out another copy of the deed. He laid it gently on the front table. "You can write resolutions, you can pass votes, but this is law." Chad opened his mouth, closed it. Ellen shifted uncomfortably. Martin cleared his throat. "What exactly do you want us to do?" Emily turned, looked at the crowd, voted down. And they did. In the next 20 minutes, a motion was made from the floor, a resident seconded it, a vote was taken. Resolution 7B failed. Unanimously. Even Helen raised her hand. Chad stood, silent. He didn't storm out. He didn't speak. He just gathered his notes and walked into the hallway. Linda Paxton followed. She found him near the vending machine, fingers shaking slightly as he tried to press the right button. "You'll land on your feet," she said, voice cool. He didn't respond. "But next time, don't try to bury a man who planted the roots." After the meeting, people stayed in the parking lot, laughing, hugging, swapping stories about the park. Emily stood beside Bill, her son asleep on her shoulder. "You did it," she said. No, he replied. We did, she nodded. But it was your voice that reminded us what matters. Bill looked out at the park lights flickering in the distance. You know, he said softly, my wife used to say the only things that last are the ones you plant in someone else. Emily smiled. Well, she said, you planted something good. 1 month later, the park looked different, even though nothing visible had changed. The trees were still where they'd always been. The pond still mirrored the sky on windless days. The ducks still wandered to the edge of the grass, hoping for breadcrumbs from toddlers with unsteady hands. But the people, those who passed through the gates and along the winding paths, looked at it differently now, with a kind of reverence, a new awareness. It wasn't just a park anymore. It was a story, a living memory, and at the center of it all was the man who refused to let it be forgotten. Bill Stratton walked slowly along the south trail, a cloth bundle under one arm and a small folding chair under the other. He didn't wear the uniform today, though folks had asked him to more than once. No, today was a day for comfort, for peace. At the old stone wall near the pond, where the sunlight made dappled patterns across the grass, he set down his chair. He unfolded it carefully and took a seat with a soft sigh. He reached into the cloth bundle and pulled out a small photograph, weathered but clean. It showed his wife, smiling, seated in this very spot with their son, reading a picture book in her lap. For a long while he just looked at it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The trees already knew the story. The birds had heard it whispered in his footsteps. After a while, a familiar voice broke the quiet. "Morning, General." It was Officer Nolan. This time, in uniform. She approached with a small brown box tucked under her arm and a grin that wasn't official, but real. "You brought it?" Bill asked. "By day, straight from the foundry." He nodded. She handed it to him. He opened it slowly. Inside was a newly polished bronze plaque. It was identical in size to the old one, but bore an updated inscription, Stratton Park, dedicated in gratitude by Major General William Stratton, U.S. Army, donated in service of community, peace, and the enduring memory of those who never return. This land belongs to the people, always. His thumb ran over the etched letters. His jaw flexed once. Then he nodded again. A few steps away, city workers were already at the stone pedestal, carefully removing the rusted old plaque. They worked slow, meticulous, respectful. No one barked orders. They didn't need to. Nolan had already briefed them, told them exactly what this meant. Bill stood when they finished. He didn't want to, but he did. And as they placed the new plaque into its frame and secured it with polished bolts, the small crowd that had begun to gather stayed silent. No one clapped. No one spoke. It felt like a flag being raised, like a name being remembered. When it was done, Nolan looked over at Bill. "Want to say a few words?" He shook his head gently. "I already did." Campaign partially unkept it, but then he turned and faced the group that had gathered. Neighbors, veterans, children holding their parents' hands, a few moms from Emily's group, some students from the high school history club, a couple of former Marines who didn't say much but always stood close. He looked at them all. "Thank you," he said simply. And that was enough. They began to disperse, not to leave, but to live. Children returned to the playground. A musician pulled out a guitar and started tuning it by the gazebo. A young couple rolled out a blanket for a picnic. Life resumed, but not mindlessly, with purpose. As Bill sat again, Emily walked up with Eli bounding just ahead of her. "You didn't tell me they finished the plaque," she said. "I didn't know until this morning." Eli clambered up beside him and stared at the new sign. "Is that your name?" the boy asked, eyes wide. Feeling invigorated? It is, Bill replied. Wait. Bill looked at him. So people remember. Eli squinted. Remember what? Bill smiled. That kindness is stronger than control, that peace is earned, that freedom isn't just a word, it's something you share, even when it costs you. The boy didn't understand every word, but he nodded like he did. Then he leaned against Bill's shoulder, and Bill let him. Emily sat on the grass nearby, watching her son rest against a man he now called Mr. Bill with casual affection. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever think about leaving? I mean, somewhere quieter, somewhere they won't try to take everything from you." He looked up at the sky. "I've fought in places where the sun was too bright and the land was too red," he said. "And I've buried friends who deserved to grow old in places just like this." He turned to her. "Most people have no interest in leadership. In fact, most people make the mistake of leaving leadership." "I think I'm done," she smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Good. We'd like you to stay." 2 weeks later, the town held a new kind of event. They called it Living Histories. Once a month, a veteran or community elder would share their story in the park. Not just the big stories, either. Little ones. The night a letter from home made it through. The moment they knew a friend wouldn't be coming back. The time they helped a child find their parents in a crowded base canteen. Bill was the first speaker. He didn't talk about war. He talked about what came after. About how silence can be a wound of its own, and how sometimes the best thing you can give someone is a place to just sit and not be questioned. At the end of the event, a girl who couldn't have been older than 9 approached him with a sketch pad. She handed it to him. Inside was a pencil drawing of the park, trees, benches, ducks, and a man with a cane standing next to a plaque. The detail was remarkable. "Is that me?" he asked. She nodded. "Do you want it?" she asked. Bill blinked, surprised. "Very much. Then it's yours." He closed the book gently. "Thank you." He looked at. "What's your name?" "Alana. You're an artist." She beamed. And in that moment, Bill realized something. This wasn't his park anymore. Not really. It belonged to her now. To Eli. To the teacher reading aloud on the blanket. To the wheelchair-bound veteran rolling over gravel beside the pond. It had worked. He didn't need to guard it anymore. And it would guard itself. That night, back in his small house with the porch light humming above him, Bill sat in his chair and listened to the crickets. He had the drawing beside him. The new plaque had already begun to catch the sunset light just right, and in the hush of evening, he allowed himself something rare. He allowed himself to rest. The kind of rest that comes not from winning, but from knowing the next generation no longer needs you to. They just need you to be there. And for once he was. At peace. Exactly where he was meant to be.